Hi, everyone. Attendance was mandatory. In fact, it was noted that to do otherwise would have been irresponsible. I considered the comment I had seen this week and debated it in my mind. Yes, in my research and in my experience, when it comes to school-aged events, there was plenty of reason to insist on compulsory attendance policies. After all, compulsory attendance policies provide many benefits. Children who are forced to be in school and in class lead to better grades and higher academic performance across the board. Social interaction is also improved when attendance is compulsory at the school age. Similar positive impacts results appear at the college level as well. However, once we're discussing adults, whether we're dealing with medical school and attending classes or similar mandatory attendance ventures, there seems to be limited gains on mandatory attendance. Compelling attendance at that point yielded distrust and disengagement simply due to the compulsion. It's a ignoring of those factors and a compulsory attendance policy that the deans at the University of Utah noted was irresponsible. Which is why this week, when Parashas Vayakhel opens with Moshe's compulsory attendance meeting, I needed to pause and ask why. Why was Moshe so insistent that everybody, Kol Adas B'nai Yisrael, the entire congregation of the people of Israel, attend? And the agenda of this very important, not to be missed meeting, that the Jews should observe Shabbos. But didn't the Jews already learn about Shabbos? Wasn't it in the Aseres Hadibros and then repeated again in last week's Parsha Kisisa? Both of those times, Shabbos laws were taught via Moshe and disseminated to the masses. So why the need to repeat the Parsha of Shabbos again this week in front of a mandatory crowd? Perhaps we might come to an understanding of the grand meeting, indeed, perhaps a deeper theme for all of Parshas Vayakhel, if we look at an anomaly in the Parsha. You see, the rest of our Parsha discusses the completion of the structure of the Mishkan and its kelim, its utensils. Most of the instructions concerning the design and the materials were previously discussed in Parshas Truma and in Parshas Kisisa, a little bit in Parshas Tetzaveh. However, in regard to one of them, the kior, or the laver, while we knew it was to be constructed from copper, we learn a new thing about it in this week's parsha. The Torah tells us, "Vayasas hakior nechoshes, veskano nechoshes." Bezalel made the copper laver and its copper base out of copper. B'maros hatzovos asher tzavu pesach oel moed, out of the mirrors of the legions of women who congregated in the courtyard outside of the entrance to the Oel Moed, to the tent of meeting. Who are these women? So Rashi cites the Medrash Tanchuma, who tells us that the women were the ones who had used these very copper mirrors when they dressed themselves to entice their husbands who were working under the barbaric slavery conditions in Mitzrayim. It was this enticement that inspired the men and encouraged the family unit to remain whole despite the terror outside. And while Moshe Rabbeinu initially thought to reject these donations, as he saw them as stemming from the Yetzer Hara, Hashem told him otherwise. Elu chavivin alai mikol. Hashem told him that these mirrors were more important than anything else. These mirrors were symbols of strength within adversity, and reminded the people not to give up. The Meshech Chochmah Rameir Simcha of Devinsk takes this message one step further. He notes that while the kior is mentioned in two other places in these parshios, this is the only one where its use to prepare the Kohanim for service is not mentioned. And the Meshech Chochmah explains that the accepting the mirrors was not only about the validation of the actions that they were used for. Rather, the mirrors themselves were there to incorporate their story into the very fabric of the Mikdash itself. There are times that we'll experience adversity. The mirrors of the kior remind us that we should not despair from a challenge, but rather to embrace it, as every Jewish couple did personally in Mitzrayim, and envision a better future that would result from it. So since different events in the Parsha are all connected, that same idea must be true at the beginning of the Parsha as well. Indeed, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal notes that the aftermath of the sin of the Egel was one of distance. Hashem was distanced from the people, having offered to separate Moshe from them and begin a new nation with Moshe alone. Moshe himself separated from the people, having moved his tent outside of the camp, and now having to wear a mask to cover himself when speaking with them. The distance was palpable. And Rav Aaron notes that in order to re-encourage the relationship and perhaps to restore and repair it, Moshe calls all of the people together instead of just speaking to the leaders and letting the word go forth and downward to the masses. This mandatory attendance was for the benefit of curing the distance and dissociation of the people in order that they know that they were still able to be close to Hashem and to Moshe as well. Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld Zatzal added that this is why Moshe's agenda was specifically about teaching about Shabbos. You see, after the Egel, the people thought that perhaps they lost their special status and were now, at least in the eyes of Hashem, like all other nations. And to that, Moshe Rabbeinu offered encouragement publicly. He told the people about Shabbos, for it is a well-known halacha that a non-Jew keeps Shabbos is chayav misa. And so therefore, by warning the people to keep Shabbos, Moshe was encouraging the people not to despair and to know that Hashem didn't forget them or reduce their status downward. Yes, the people had sinned. Yes, they created a rupture and a trauma in the relationship. But just because there was a sin, the relationship could still be repaired. Not only would the nation be strengthened, but so would every individual through meeting about and keeping the covenant, the bris of Shabbos. This would then be followed with the command and the carry out of the Mishkan building, which would serve as a kapara for a sin, allowing further repair to the relationship to ensue. To miss these critical lessons, indeed, would be irresponsible, and so all of Adas Yisrael showed up. The kior, built from mirrors that once reflected the hope of the Jewish women in Egypt, stood as a symbol that challenges can be transformed into holiness, into Kedusha. And Moshe's compulsory gathering at the start of Parashas Vayakhel echoes that same lesson. Moments of despair are not endpoints, but rather they're opportunities for renewal. And so when we're faced with setbacks, whether personal, communal, or spiritual, we have to remember that Hashem doesn't abandon us. Like the Jews after the Egel, our response to adversity must continue to be to build, to rebuild, to come together, and to reaffirm our commitment to Hashem. And through that process, we emerge stronger than before. As God himself said, Elu chavivin alay min hakol. These lessons are more important to me than everything and anything else. Wishing you and yours a Shabbat Shalom and a Shabbat Shalom to all.